Hello everyone, welcome to and/or welcome back to Weaponized CAD. I'm your host Danny, and today we are going to set up a drawing from scratch. This is going to be a quick video, how to get yourself moving from nothing. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click Start Drawing, or if you have a different template that you want to use, you can click the drop down here and choose a different one. For this video, we're going to use the AutoCAD.dwt normal English feet and inches drawing template. Uses color-dependent plot styles. Plot styles we haven't gotten into yet. That'll be at a later date. So I'm going to click AutoCAD.dwt, and it's going to fire up drawing number 4 up at the top. There's only a handful of things you need to worry about when you're starting a drawing from scratch. The first is units. In the command line or in your dynamic input, type units, hit enter. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to control how you draw objects, how dimensions are set up, how text is set up, but dimensions and text are secondary to setting this. So let's say we were drawing a floor plan. Plans are always drawn in architectural units. If you click under the length column, the type, where it says decimal, click the drop down, set it to architectural. Below architectural is the precision. Now, the precision is very important only when you're dimensioning objects. So let's say you have a line that's 1 foot 3/32 of an inch. If the precision is not set to 30 seconds, it's going to round it up or down based on what that actual dimension is. So if you need super accurate dimensions, you're going to need this precision a little bit tighter. So 1 to 30, 1/32, 1/64, 1/128, 1/256. I don't use anything below 1/16 of an inch because that's overkill, and most of the things that I do don't involve 30-second tolerance. So for this, I'm going to change it, or actually I'm just going to keep it at 1/16. Insertion scale, you don't typically have to touch. That comes later when you're inserting a drawing into another drawing based on the units, based on the drawing units of the drawing that you're inserting. This will come into play. Right now, we're not going to talk about that. Lighting, ignore that completely. We're not using lighting at all. Angle is going to use decimal degrees. If you click the drop down, it's going to give you degrees, minutes, seconds, grads, radians, or surveyors units. I typically keep this at decimal degrees. Decimal degrees is fine. Precision, I like to change that to hundredths. So 0.00. And you actually have the ability to change your angles to clockwise, but AutoCAD defaults to counterclockwise. So don't touch this one, because in a previous video or in a future video, I've explained that AutoCAD works in counterclockwise. So if you change this, it's going to screw everything up that I've already discussed in a future video. So leave that unchecked. We're going to click OK. The next thing we want to change is the D settings. These are your drafting settings, which are also able to be accessed through the bottom buttons. So for instance, object snap, we have that turned on because it's illuminated blue. If you right click on that and go to object snap settings, it brings up the drafting settings. So let's start at the first tab, snap and grid. This is where you turn your snaps on. This is where you can change your snap settings. So in the intro video, I mentioned that you can snap to the grid. This is where you would change that. If you turn snap on and you change this to 1/16, Y setting 1/16, it's automatic. It's not going to let you make the X snap larger or smaller than the Y snap and vice versa, unless you uncheck equal X and Y spacing. Grid on is automatic. You can see it in the background there, and you can change your grid spacing. So if you set it to 1/16, it's going to automatically change the Y spacing because it's squares. Snap type, you can change this, but this doesn't come into play until much later. So if you're in this menu, leave it at rectangular snap. I'm actually going to turn both of these off for my drawing. Then I'm going to move to polar tracking. Polar tracking is when you're drawing lines, you can actually snap to specific angles. So if you click F10, which turns on polar tracking down here, you can actually have it snap the cursor to angles instead of typing angles while you're drawing the line. So if you wanted to get crazy and say, I want the cursor to automatically snap to 5-degree increments, you can do that here. You can also add your own angles. So if you're doing very specific work where you need something crazy like 32, 37.5, you can set that here, and you can add a bunch to that list by clicking the new button. Object snap tracking settings, track orthogonally only, or track using all polar angle settings. I typically leave this set as track orthogonally only. Polar angle measurement, absolute. Leave it set to absolute. Next tab over is object snap. The object snaps are the same thing. It was literally what we clicked on down here. They're turned on with F3, and you can set them in here. So if you only need endpoint and midpoint, just click endpoint, midpoint, click OK. Or you can turn off midpoint, turn on center, turn off center, turn on quadrant, intersection, perpendicular, and tangent. You can turn these all on. It's a little hard to work with them all turned on because it has a hard time, especially if you're working in tight quarters, tight line work, tight polylines, arcs, circles. It's going to be jumping all over the place because it's able to find so many different snaps within a small area. So use these sparingly in a sense, or just literally just click the ones that you want on all the time. And then as you need other ones, you can click like node, turn node on. Node isn't really used very often. It's very specific. It's for points and it's for blocks, which we get into later. 3D object snap, ignore this completely. We're not doing anything 3D until much, much later. Dynamic input, this is the dynamic input that is turned on down here. You can actually change how this appears, what it's telling you, what kind of options you have in the dynamic input. I commonly leave these set to the way that AutoCAD ships. We hit this arrow up here. We can go to quick properties. Quick properties we haven't gotten into yet. Leave this unchecked for now. And selection cycling. Selection cycling is if you have a number of objects drawn in a very tight space and it's hard to single click select one of those objects. Selection cycling actually lets you mouse over that jumble of objects and it gives you a list of all the objects that it's finding under the cursor. This is actually a really good one to have turned on, especially when you're learning. Leave everything set to the defaults that pop up when you check it. And then you click OK. So you'll notice that the grid turned off in the background. We have our units set up. We have our drawing settings set up. We have a number of things turned on down at the bottom here. Dynamic input, polar tracking, object snaps. And that's pretty much it. So at this point, you can get going. If at any point you're in the middle of your drawing and you decide, you know what, I don't really want to use architectural units. I want to use fractional units. The units can be changed at any time. So don't feel like you're trapped in whatever units you start the drawing with. You can change it at any point. There's no harm that'll come to changing the units halfway through drawing. So thanks for coming. That was basic drawing setup. Like I said, it was going to be quick at this point. Like and subscribe if you learned anything, and I'll see you in the next video.